There we go. Perfect. Okay. Can everybody hear me okay? Thumbs up. So we were doing hellos and having people send in where they're from, and we have people from all around the United States.
Great.
So exciting. People that are speech therapists, child psychologists, and parents. So this is really exciting. Okay, we're ready to get started. Okay, everyone. So welcome to this month's Resource Corner. We are so excited to have you guys here, and we're so excited to have Michelle Garcia winner here. But before we get started, I'd like to ask everyone to turn off their mics as we proceed and turn off their cameras. And if you have any questions, please send them in the chat as you go along, and we'll try to answer them in the time allotted. We're trying to keep it short. That way we don't lose everyone's attention, but this topic is super exciting. So we're so excited about getting started. So allow me to introduce myself. My name is Alec Khalil. I'm a speech language pathologist in the state of Texas and co-founder of Epic Therapist, a speech language pathology clinic and OT here in Plano. And today I feel so honored about introducing to you guys Michelle Garcia winner. Michelle Garcia winner is a renowned speech language pathologist that specializes in the treatment of individuals with social learning challenges and the founder and CEO of Social Thinking. Social Thinking is a company dedicated to helping individuals develop their social competencies to meet their personal social goals. And they have a plethora of resources and trainings provided throughout the year. So if you guys would like additional resources after this training, please check out Social Thinking. Thank you so much, Michelle, for joining us today. I am so excited. I know I'm like over the moon about getting started. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for being part of it.
Thank you. Okay, so let's delve in. So basically, from my experience with teaching children to self-regulate and self-regulation strategies, I found that teaching them their self-regulation strategies have helped them improve their social skills and help them become independent thinkers. So today, would you be able to share with us how self-regulation is related to those social competencies, and really highlighting key strategies that you feel parents and providers would benefit from using?
Okay, and for those who are not familiar with the social thinking methodology, it's constantly evolving as I continue to work in the field with clients, as well as my 10 other collaborative members of my speaking and training collaborative. But I started 25 years ago, specifically with students who had solid to high level language, expressive receptive language, and academic intelligence. I started in the field in the 70s working with classically autistic, nonverbal, minimally verbal folks, largely coming out of institutions, and saw a real need for us to have different treatments for different types of folks, even if they have similar diagnostic labels. And as many of you guys are familiar, the autism spectrum arrived, but it doesn't mean we have one type of kid, although administrators may not understand that since they're all called autism spectrum. So our work really focuses on the high end of the autism spectrum and off the spectrum to the spectrum of social functioning. So you will find a lot of kids and adults diagnosed with mental health as primary diagnosis, including ADHD, but also personality disorders and different things that if you look deeper, you're gonna find a lot of social learning challenges. It's interesting that none of us there is no field that's really trained or studies social cognition in a big way. Our field says it does, but it really doesn't understand it in a big way. So that's our backdrop. And then the next thing I want to define is the term self-regulation, because years ago I was asked to review someone's book on self-regulation, but when I reviewed the book, it was all about what teachers could do to get kids to behave. So an external system that rewards a kid's behavior with the motivation of getting that kid to behave is not a self-regulation program. That is an external. It's, you know, the question is, where is the information to the kid coming from? Is it coming from the outside environment and encouraged through motivational systems? Or is it coming from inside the child's awareness of what's going on in the world and how they're functioning in the world? And it's from that point that we start to develop self-regulation. Infants naturally develop self-regulation. Obviously, you know, we all know, if those of us who've been moms, you know, the crying baby, and then how they learn to calm and soothe themselves. But children socially are self-regulating around goals and shared purpose and collaboration by 3 years old, typically developing kids. And that's why we can have formal things like a preschool or collaborative play events. Prior to that, the children are well on their way. Theory of mind's under development. So when we look at self-regulation, one of the other things to think about is that term has largely only been used by many to talk about emotional self-regulation. So how we're feeling, obviously tantrums. I mean, I'm just finishing up a webinar we're going to be giving through my company a week from Saturday, and it's all on strategies to help our kids deal with the stress of the, not to deal with, but to even get our kids talking more specifically about the stress of the pandemic, our more black and white thinkers. And so when we move away from emotion, like emotional self-regulation is really important, obviously, keeps us being able to manage through negative emotions. Most of us don't need help managing through positive emotions. But then when you broaden that scope, you'll start to see that everything we do socially is a self-regulatory event. You walk by somebody on this block, you know, the street, now we walk wide around those people, or kids passing in the hall, and you've got to decide how do you move your body based on the message you want to send another person. If you want to get the most, you know, it's interesting when you walk in crowded spaces, which kids are returning to school, if you want to get somewhere the most efficiently, walk a straight line. And in doing so, you will really annoy the majority of people. So to even walk down a hall, we self-regulate by having to figure out how do we problem solve my goal based on how I want people to think about me. I got to steer wide around that person. And we all are trying to remember that, right? With the pandemic, we've got our masks on, and it's really impolite now to get nearly as close as we were before to people when we walk by them. So when you start to think about self-regulation, now the question is, what is it that we're not self-regulating when we're in the presence of others? And we don't have to be interacting to self-regulate. It's just, how do I want people to think about me or understand me as I share space? You know, right now I went to the farmer's market yesterday, and people were in this line, but the line was like 15 feet apart. So I couldn't tell if someone's just standing in the market or in the line. And so now I have to self-regulate. You know, is it okay to go to that person and try to figure out where they are? Where do I stand? How does everybody figure each other out is a huge part of social world. In speech pathology, I feel like we're too narrow in a lot of our instruction because we always talk about it as an interaction. But years ago when I started social thinking, I thought, what about all these kids who aren't interacting and really annoying folks? Like, what's that? That's social too. So that's just kind of my intro to kind of just getting on the same page. I would like to share screen and show you, for those who are not familiar with our social competency model, it's a pretty nice visual to just get you zoomed in on that. So do I have can I share? Yeah, great. All right, so some of you I know have probably heard me speak, and some of you have probably heard me speak many times, but some of you are new to this. So here was one of the challenges that we experienced, you know, in our work so directly with students from 4 years old across a lifespan. Pam and I do a lot of work with very mature adults, including a lot of folks who are in Silicon Valley industry. We're often referred clients from mental health because they just don't know what to do with somebody who's, you know, the traditional CBT supports cognitive behavioral for anxiety aren't enough. So one of the challenges, though, is the behavioral community was frustrated with social thinking. We have so much work, but we don't have a research project for everything we do. We base our work a lot on the research from our experiences. We share it. And so we are getting a lot of negative, almost competition, and some pretty negative stuff with some of the more outrageous members of that community about what we're doing, because they're doing social skills. They were like better, faster, and all that. So it was like, how do I get out of this discussion? Because we are not an external treatment. I am a trained behaviorist. That's how I started, with Dr. Robert Cagle teaching me back in the 1970s in college, classic behaviorism. But I'm a cognitivist now. So the way to change it is to change our language. You got to start talking about teaching social competencies rather than social skills. And now if you get into the research on social information processing, you'll, this is kind of a summary of some of this body of research, which is how do we process and respond to each other's signals? So we drilled it down to, it's way oversimplified, but basically it makes sense, right? If you're not attending, you cannot interpret. So we know a lot of our kids struggle with attention. You obviously can't self-regulate if you're not attending. And it's attending outward, and then it's also attending inward. Some of you guys work with kids on the autism spectrum, or perhaps diagnosed with ADHD, who should be diagnosed with autism, who are really unaware of themselves with others. They have really poor social self-awareness. And what I pretty much guarantee about all of those kids are the kids who have really poor social self-awareness have incredibly poor social attention. Now, if you want to ask where the research is on that, I'm going to tell you, I don't know that it's there, because researchers ask specific questions, and our question, I'm sure it's in, you could actually distill it. Actually, it is there. You could read the work of Dr. Thomas Sello. He's a cultural anthropologist. But to interpret, if you're not attending, you're not interpreting others. But if you're not attending to yourself and understanding what's going on inside of yourself, you're not interpreting yourself either. And so attend, interpret, and then we interpret to problem solve. And when we interpret more than one thing. We are interpreting the situation. Who are the people? What are their roles? How are people feeling? What is happening? And so our brain is context dependent, up and running, and we have to interpret what they call self-otherness. How are other people thinking and feeling? How am I thinking and feeling? Are people have thoughts and feelings about me? What's my role in this? What's theirs? Sometimes we don't have a role. Sometimes we're just observing. But that's the interpretation piece, and it's huge. And as speech pathologists, you know, and psychologists who are attending, here's a big question. How do you teach someone to interpret if they can't infer? Well, you can't, right? So where does inferencing come from? Inferencing comes from, it's born within our brain. Just like children are able to roll over, creep, to crawl, to walk, the brain is born to infer. And when a brain is not born to infer, you are not going to get self-regulation. You are not going to get social competencies. When we have a kid who really is not aware and is so stuck in the concrete world, not because anyone's done anything wrong, that is a group of kids who really need to be with behavioral, humane behavioral interventions. You know, my favorite one is the CERTS model. But I think there's a lot of good humane behavioral interventions. And I wouldn't call CERTS model behavioral, but they do use that at times as part of their broader model. But it's really focused on that person. So we attend, we interpret self and others in context to then figure out, okay, if I'm part of this, what am I supposed to do? So here's a simple one for you. It sounds like you're walking down back in the days where we're all together in our communities again, say at school or at work. You're walking down the hall and you see somebody. Do you decide to say hi or not? Like, oops, let me turn my email off. Who do you decide to say hi to? When kids are walking in school, you don't walk down the hall and go, hi, 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 hi. It's actually, I'm attending, I'm interpreting, who do I see? What is my goal? I'm going to say hi to that person, or somebody just looks friendly. So I'm going to acknowledge them because they look like they want to acknowledge me. So that's problem solving. And that's entering critical thinking. And as we problem solve in real time, millisecond timing, now we figure out how we want to respond. You all have examples of walking by people and choosing to look at the floor. And that was your response because you don't want to say hi to that person, and sometimes it's because you don't like the person or there's awkwardness. Another time it's you've already said hi to them too many times in the day. We usually can only give one big hi a day, and the rest of the time we walk by, we give them a nonverbal, and when we've seen them too many times, we just stop saying hi to them. So that's all problem solving. And then we get to a social response. And the social response has to do, it's what I call social cognitive self-regulation, because now you got to figure out, what are we talking about? If we're talking, should I stand here? Just like I talked about at the market. And so this is just the journey, and it's a treatment journey, because if your kids aren't attending, like a lot of times our kids aren't attending, but we have our primary goal is teaching them to have a conversation. So would that make sense to jump a kid into conversational skills when they don't have social attention? So how do we go back and start to look at, circles of engagement, joint attention, even with older kids? The interpretation stuff, we have a free article on this on our website, socialthinking.com. Put in social competency model, you'll see webinar, you'll see free articles, and it's also in our e-learning. But this is kind of where this is our treatment journey and pathway for understanding self-regulation. All those responses are the result of self-regulation. So I'm wondering, do you want to ask another question, or do you want me?
I think right now, when we're talking about social attention, what are some strategies that we can, as providers and parents, that we could teach our kids to become more socially aware and have that social awareness, in return social attention?
Yeah, so I think it depends on the age of the child, because when we're working with little ones, we're going to do a lot of natural attention engagement. In fact, babies play natural attention games like peekaboo. Like that's just a huge thrill for a baby as they're establishing that attention. If we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of attention, there's some of our folks on the autism spectrum. So in my world, I talk about neurotypical up here, and that our brain, the weaker our social attention, the weaker our social learning. There's it's a cascade, direct correlation, direct relationship. Some of our folks with autism who cannot rally social attention, as you guys try, like one of the things, I'll assess this quite a bit, you will too, but here's something super practical to assess social attention for like a 4-year-old or a little bit older or a little bit younger. You're just sitting next to the kid and you go, look, and you just do this big extreme look. And if the kid doesn't follow, you're like, we got a problem, right? Like sometimes we get in these big standardized tests and it's like, hey, some of these things we need some really basic understanding. Now, to get that kid's social attention, where you're going to want to try to figure out is, can I gather his attention if it's just me with this other kid? And you're going to see that some of our kids can start, and I'm not going to get into the minutia on this because really this could take hours to explain, because there's so many different kids and different types of folks and adults. But social attention is really, you know how they say people on the autism spectrum don't have attention issues? I'm like, well, wait a minute. They have huge social attention issues. In fact, that's kind of a hallmark. Mm-hmm. So actually, some of our students, they're never going to get better. Once they're past, once they get past plasticity and you're still seeing really, really weak social attention, we need to work with where we are. I will tell you, social attention is completely linked to, here's my belief, and it's formed after a lot of years. But here's a triad that we believe is super powerful out there, and I think you'll see it. Really weak social attention. Child cannot naturally bring themselves to attend to people in context. You will see that they are very literal language interpreters, because when you're not attending, you're not inferring. When children attend, they are making inferences of what's relevant. So you're going to see really weak ability to infer. So you'll be incredibly literal. And they're not just literal with language, they can be really literal with how they interpret the world. So like a man in his 20s who works here, who's super literal, poor attention. I was reached over to grab the recycling basket he was bringing back. And when I reached to grab the basket, I'm looking at the basket, I'm heading towards the basket, he puts the basket down and shakes my hand. So that's an example of he just doesn't get it. He can't attend to interpret. Mm-hmm. So as you're going to see these three things: weak attention, really literal language, and incredibly poor self-awareness. And on our scale of the social mind, we're going to call that group the challenged social communicators. And we believe from our experience, it's more than belief, it's our experience, that these guys have very poor critical thinking, and they will never acquire critical thinking across their life, as we've worked with them across all the way into the 60s. But the next group up, who's more like Temple Grandin's part of this group, they have poor social attention, but really strong science interpretation. Now we're going to talk to them logically, but they're going to struggle with that. So I think what is important for you guys to know is that this is a cascade of events. The weaker you are with your social attention, the weaker you're going to be at interpreting, the weaker you're going to be at problem solving and responses. As you are gaining abilities in this, and we do see our folks learning across life, whether they're ASD, ADHD, whatever diagnosis, there's all types out there. We do see them learning across life, not like incredible growth like you're going to see out of a 2 or 3 or 4-year-old. So, but I think as we're thinking about our students, we have to think about what's reasonable for them in treatment, and just giving them a diagnosis of autism spectrum won't help you do that. Right. And even the levels of 1, 2, 3, I think level 2 ASD, you're getting into folks who have very weak social attention, and then the weaker the social attention, the less you're going to focus on competencies, the more you're going to work on skills.
Right. And I think whenever I think about like social attention, I love that you're thinking with your brain, with your eyes. And I think that kind of helps with helping kids early on think with their eyes, look for those social cues to kind of develop that self-awareness. Do you want to talk a little bit about that strategy of thinking with their whole body?
Yeah, so years ago when I started this in a high school, I started realizing that we keep talking to them about social, but we don't define for them what's social. So metacognitively, language is amazing, because a language can get us to think about thinking. Those who don't develop language don't develop as strong an internal problem solving, even if they're, I don't know if some of you are familiar, and I won't be able to tell you what country or area this was, but it was in South America where they had family members, they had congenital deafness. And so the adults never had any kind of treatment at all for their deafness. So they never developed language, and they had really rudimentary sign. And then caregivers came in through, NGOs and stuff, and started volunteering and teaching the kids sign. And what they found was, as the kids developed a language, their theory of mind, they became better than their parents at theory of mind and critical thinking. Like, it's just the power of language. So one of the ahas I had years ago, just kind of intuitively, was I was working with these kids who were considered bright in a high school, but they weren't bright about the social world. So I started unpacking it by creating language to explain the social world rather than expect them to behave in it. So that would be the language of think with your eyes rather than eye contact. Some of you guys work with kids where you say, give me eye contact, and their chin goes up, but their eyes go down. That's a kid who's trying hard, but has no clue what you want. because they don't naturally understand how to process that. So I started using language to talk about what eyes do, and eyes move, and eyes look, and eyes try to figure things out. And so we call that think with the eyes. And that alone, I think for kids who are able to gain from that, you're already talking about a little bit higher kid, because although teachers have talked to me about using it with more classically autistic kids, which, you know, we're really careful to say, hey, our stuff isn't designed for those who don't have language, but they say that just that basic description helps to change the focal point again a bit. I also created language about body in the group because they didn't know where their bodies were. Read the group plan. Every time groups are together, they have a plan. Susan Paulette Truesdale allowed me to use the word she developed in the 90s, which is whole body listening. And then you guys are familiar with things like expected and unexpected behavior and flexible versus stuck thinking, were all language that I created to just start unpacking the social world.
And I think right now that we're moving into it almost feels like a new social world because of all the new social rules. So as we move into the new school year, what are some things that one of the questions was, now that we're working with children at home, what are strategies you would recommend for making up for the lack of social reinforcement to help maintain adequate social competencies?
Okay. That's a good question. So I think what I think you're trying to say is what we have different social norms is the language that we use for how we handle ourselves when we are in face-to-face, like in a store, is very different. And then how we handling ourselves online. These kids we're talking about who have incredibly poor social attention are going to really struggle with online education. I don't think I really need to tell you that. I think you've already seen it. But it's a mistake to say that, oh, you know, the teacher can get them to do this if she's highly qualified. So we're seeing those challenges, and school districts are trying to get those with these deeper needs back into face-to-face, because the only way to get that kid to attend is to be right there with them. When you have kids, now if we're going to jump up and talk about the kids who were looking at social relationship and social relationship development through the online courses, classrooms, you know, it's very awkward, and kids are now coming into new classes and trying to figure out who are these people, who is the teacher. There's no three-dimensional sense of self. And so what's I think the really hard thing about the online experience is it is all intentional. Like you can sit next to a kid in class and happen to talk to them, and that's how tons of friendships start. And now you actually have to intentionally really try to get that person's attention and go from there. So one of the challenges in all of these questions are, some of you guys are thinking about kids who are quite weak, but the family really wants them to have, and they should, you know, have social interactions. A lot of what I'm working on is, hey, social is not just friendship. That's something really important that I think we get stuck on. Is so many people say to me, this kid doesn't want to have friends, so I can't work with them. Social is so much broader than that. You know, now we talk about how does the social world work to teach kids how to work in the social world. The social world is how do you share space. So when we're talking about engaging with peers, there's different types of engagement. One is, you know, if these kids are able to tolerate a Zoom call where they can participate amongst the class, that naturally is going to put you up into a little bit higher level. But some of our kids sit there. We're about to put out an article next week, sign up for a newsletter, on just the challenges of these kids who don't have that much self-awareness, and they're making faces as they stare at themselves in the Zoom camera, and they're just totally spacing out and everybody's seeing it. And it's very different than seeing it in a classroom, because what our brain attends to is the fastest unexpected behavior. Like that's what we're all paying attention to. So different kids, different needs, different age. I have a kid I'm working with who's 14. We've really been using this time to talk about social as an organizational skill and what's his goals. Because, you know, he was like, summer's here, I don't have to do anything. And I'm like, well, all those other kids are getting to know, you know, that are in your school. they already know each other and they're keeping a relationship going, so they get back to school and they're still relating. If you're going to opt out, you're going to be that kid that doesn't seem interested in anyone.
Right.
And so one of the tricky things about us humans is we're incredibly egocentric, all of us. So if someone doesn't seem interested in us, we aren't interested in them, unless we know that they've got a significant need, and then we will be interested altruistically, compassionately, but not in that same typical relationship. So that's what I'm working with some of my folks on, is what's their goal? Who is it that they're interested in? They're getting to see all these kids, pick one or two kids. Can is there opportunity to talk to them on the side? And now what's the alternative after school? And I think, a year ago, I was at the Brain and Learning Conference we're all shuddering at how much time kids are on screen time, and now kids are on screen all the time. So I'm working with like a kid I'm working with who's got obsessive, gaming behavior. But even a lot of our kids are getting a little worn out of always gaming. So teaching them how you can take the relationship you developed on gaming and start talking to them about other things, not just gaming. And just, take where you've already got something and grow it, but don't think you have to be stuck in gaming. Mm-hmm. And so now he has homework. Actually, he's on a 2-week summer break, but his homework is to, there's this one particular kid he has his own goal and plan with, that he's broadening that relationship to find out other things that they could do other than game.
And I think that's one of the biggest challenges is that, we had to kind of shift into decreasing screen time for some kids, but now that's their social world is through screen time and virtual means. A lot of kids are doing virtual cooking classes or virtual meetups after their day is done. And so how do we get our kids right now is the big question for the kids that do need that virtual experience. How do we help them also continue to socially grow? Do you feel like you have something that from so far from your experience that has helped your kids with increasing their social interaction through this new mode?
So here's a couple of things I've been doing. Is social can also be in your house with your family. Like, our kids don't actually talk to their family a lot. They only talk to their family about what they want to talk about. So I've started, I don't know if any of you guys saw at the providers conference, getting my kids to have to interview their family to find stuff out about what they don't know about their parents or their siblings. Because what was tolerable before, like, we do everything you want because you're home for a little bit, everyone's getting exhausted. So how to help our kids see that social is not just outside of the house, but it's inside of the house too. And I think obviously that's a realistic place, is to try to not just do what you do with your family and then socialize online. In terms of the online things, I think it's so hard to answer these questions because there's such a spectrum of functioning out there. And so, this is not ideal time. I think we're trying to find what is a kid interested in, as you already said, and you get them to follow that interest because that's what they're going to attend the best to. And then try to get them to initiate a relationship. But you're going to see a lot of anxiety with our kids too, who are not used to doing this. Like, they really like adults as teachers, but they get really anxious that they're going to do something wrong. That same anxiety is showing up. So I think if you're working with some kids on social outreach and initiation and being able to maintain and not just follow the script of whatever the course is, if you want to broaden that social, you have to also look at, do they have anxiety? Do they need strategies for managing that? And what is the risk of talking to somebody?
Right. And it is, what I've found is it depends on their language level and their receptive skills and their ability to really sustain attention. But what I found is knowing the goal at the beginning, having that goal in mind, and then using visual reinforcers to kind of help with that sustaining attention during sessions. Especially if it's like, a 15 to 20-minute session. Sometimes for kids that don't want to sit in front of a screen and work towards a non-preferred goal, knowing the end is near. Having like a visual to kind of help with that helps with developing expected behavior during sessions. And I think it's like, it's one of those things that it works for some kids, and then some kids you have to get creative and find something else.
Yeah, I mean, you're either now talking about either a young child or a very low functioning older child. And then I don't think we're talking about competencies as much as we're talking about skills with those kids.
Yeah.
So I think there really is a line in the sand about using our methodology and understanding that it is for folks who can usually bring in some level of attention and want to pursue. The last thing, and I'll kind of wrap up on this, is social and organizational skills are all executive functioning. I have free webinars that I've already filmed that are on my website on self-regulation and executive functioning. But I'm really working with families on, for gifted and talented kids, hey, your kids, they're going to learn, like, don't worry too much about the curriculum. Like, they are learners of what they learn, but take this as an opportunity to work on self-management, or executive functioning, organizational skills. And that's what I was just talking about with social relationships. Since it's all intentional, what is it you want to achieve rather than what do we want you to achieve? Once we get you to adopt that goal, then how do we get you to work at that in terms of who are you contacting, how are you contacting them, when are you going to do it, what are you guys going to do together? So
thank you so much, Michelle, and sharing your strategies. I feel like it's one of those times that just hearing it from you in person helps so much. And
well, I think it's also really important that none of us have the answers. I mean, these are unprecedented times. And when you have kids who really cannot attend through a screen, we have real problems, and it's nobody's fault. So it's, also take care of yourself and realize these challenges are huge. The families are worn out. So much of making something happen in a home is getting parents to make it happen, and everyone's exhausted. So I don't have any kind of magic bullet or magic strategies. I think it's a really good time to just keep figuring out who is this kid, what do they need, and these kids are stressed out. These are change-resistant kids, and the world is totally uncertain right now. Families are stressed. So I think us paying a lot of attention to their emotions, getting them to talk about feelings, using visual charts to get them to talk about, to even point to feelings if they don't have the language, are really important. I know parents are anxious about kids with friends. I think this is a great time to work on what's happening in the house socially too, because there isn't a magic path to friendship unless kids are old enough to start to mine that or have the skills. So be kind to yourself out there.
You're absolutely right. And I feel like the goal is to ultimately utilize, what we have, the resources that we have, to improve the quality of life that we can have. And with that end in mind, I think we can hopefully navigate these uncharted waters with success.
Yeah, and you know what? The last thing I'll say is I spend so much time observing my students to learn from them, and that's where we all are. If we're not figuring out what's their attend, interpret, problem solve, respond patterns, we're not really going to be able to help them in a big way. So take that time. If nothing else, just get to know your kid better. Because you will help by doing that. All right,
Yes.
take care, you guys.
So much, Michelle. Thank you for everyone that joined, and you guys have a wonderful start to the new school year. If you guys have additional questions, please either you can email social thinking if you guys have anything specific. And then also check out the webinars for future trainings. There's a lot of great resources, and hopefully we can all get through this time together.
And I'll mention socialthinking.com, and we're just about to release. We have an incredible online. We have had real success with our online training and free webinars. So get on our newsletter, sign up, and you'll hear about the newsletter, the webinar, and our training coming up. All right. Thank you, guys. Take care.
Bye.